Joining us today from the YouTube channel Mattsquatch Presents, we have Matt himself, Mattsquatch. How's it looking over there?
Good. It's nice, bright, sunny day. Beautiful here in Southern California.
So Matt, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about what you do, a little bit about your channel. Would you consider yourself a researcher?
No, I always like to describe myself as more of a Bigfoot enthusiast. And I think a lot of what I do, my channel is probably 60, 70% Bigfoot, and the rest is kind of other paranormal subjects. Mostly, I consider myself more of a cryptozoological guy than just straight a Bigfoot guy. Because we look into some of the other phenomenon species, like this dogman creature that people see, and some of the more rare cryptids and stories from around the world. Stories of monsters and strange things in the woods have always fascinated me. And it seems like every little patch of woods, even in a very well-populated place, it seems like every little patch of woods or campground or area that's trees has its sighting of something strange. And that's really always fascinated me. But I've kind of always been into the broader subjects of ghosts and stuff like that, and UFOs. But generally, my channel is about 60, 70% Bigfoot. And then we also explore some other topics. Because as time goes on, you kind of realize that there's a lot of crossover between the subjects as well. So it's kind of important to, when you're looking at, say, a focus on cryptozoological entities or Sasquatch, it's kind of important to look at the broader picture of weird stuff going on.
Yeah. How long have you been doing this?
Yeah, well, I've been into the paranormal, different subjects variously for a long time. Spent a number of years, 15 years ago or so, I was really into ghost hunting and demonology and spirits and that kind of stuff. And then I went through a phase where I was really into UFOs and underground bases. And then also areas of high strangeness like Skinwalker Ranch, Yosemite. There's different areas that have always intrigued me as well. But especially always interested in Bigfoot. My mom has a degree in anthropology. That was always something I could talk to her about, was Bigfoot, the scientific part of it. And then, like I always tell, Bigfoot's like it's like the gateway drug to the paranormal, because you're going to get into Bigfoot, and then you're going to start wondering about all this other strange things like orbs in the woods that are often accompanied with Bigfoot, some of these other creatures that are seen in the same areas, some of the post-traumatic stress disorder that happens with Bigfoot encounters that are very similar to what happens to people in a UFO encounter. So you realize there's a lot of crossover in these subjects. So to just kind of talk about Bigfoot specifically, you're really only getting part of a picture. So yeah, we talk about a lot of that stuff. I've had my YouTube channel 3 years now, 3.5 years, something like that. But I was into it before that. And yeah, so we talk about a lot on my channel. Personal stuff. I had some things happen in my family last year. And so there are certain times where I put 3 or 4 videos out a week on my channel, and there are certain times where I put like one thing out a month. The last few weeks, I'm starting to pick back up with it. Things are starting to be a little more consistent, where I have more time to get out and do field work and make my theory videos. But yeah, we basically, it's my channel. It's dictatorship, not a democracy. So I talk about what I want to talk about and things that I find interesting. A lot of the stuff I talk about are people email me questions or ask me questions. I love doing live streams where people just throw off the cuff questions at me. And yeah, we kind of do it all and take a video camera out in the woods with me and my buddies a few times a year, and a lot of solo trips myself. Yeah, we kind of do a little bit of everything on the channel.
So I wanted to talk to you specifically about a certain area in California that both me and you have swum around in a little bit. So people within the community may be familiar with a woman by the name of CLAUDIA Ackley, who made news headlines a few years back when she announced her plans to sue the Department of Fish and Game, the California's Department of Fish and Game, to recognize the Bigfoot as a species and all this stuff. And it was all over. I mean, I wouldn't doubt if it was on a couple of late night show monologues. Like that thing made some rounds, you know. And
it was a pretty big deal.
you remember first hearing about that?
Yeah, well, especially in the Bigfoot world, we kind of heard about it first. And like most things in life, there's good and bad. You know, like donuts taste delicious, but they're bad for you. You know, it's like many things. When it comes down to Claudia Ackley's encounter, I really 100% believe her. I interviewed her, talked to her several times, been to that location a bunch of times. But the people she chose, Todd Standing, who she chose to represent in her court case in Canada, and then some of the other court proceedings, and some of the other stuff that she did, I wasn't a big fan of, and I think most of the Bigfoot community, most of the people who kind of study and follow this research were not happy with some of the choices that she made. Now they're her decisions and it's her lawsuit and her way of doing it, you know.
Now, by that, really quick, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but by that, are you talking specifically about Todd Standing, like the association with Todd Standing, or was there other people, like other people,
Yeah,
specific people involved as far like Todd Standing, that kind of, you know, this all kind of plays into where I'm going in the long scheme of things. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Todd Standing is very polarized. I'm trying to be very politically correct in how I
Right.
put this
And
stuff.
so really quick, people, I mean, this, if you're unfamiliar with this encounter, Claudia Ackley's encounter, I'm entering the area that this whole encounter happened, this whole specific area. How's my sound there? I feel like sound like a robot here.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
I'm just using this specific encounter to segue into the bigger picture, which is this area.
Right.
But before that, I wanted to say, if people are not familiar with Claudia Ackley's encounter, are you able to hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, I keep getting this little, it's almost like an ultrasound heartbeat in my headphones here, and I just want to make sure I'm not talking passionately, and on your end it's like robot sounds.
Yeah, it's probably the government listening to our conversation.
That's true. There you go. So again, Claudia Ackley, if you're not familiar with her encounter, it's been covered to death. She has made her rounds. She has talked about her encounter at length, sometimes interviews spanning up to 3 hours. It's out there. Look up Claudia interviews. I'll add a link to one of her interviews. I'll add a link to a couple of her interviews at the bottom of this video here. But if you're watching this video, chances are you're not a Johnny come newbie to this whole subject. Chances are you're gonna understand what we're talking about, or you're just, you know, or you're not. So from this point on, if you're somebody who's like, who's Todd Standing, who's this, and who, you know, this conversation, this conversation may be a little bit, you know, a little bit down in the Bigfoot trenches for you. You know, this is
right.
So,
if you want, I can give a quick rundown of everything.
Yeah, go for it. If you don't mind.
Yeah. So Claudia Ackley's a lady with her kids, and they lived in the Arrowhead, Big Bear area, Crestline area, which is in the Southern California mountains. Most people think of Southern California as beaches and deserts, that kind of stuff. And we have a lot of that. But we have a couple of local mountain ranges that are about an hour and a half drive from the beach, more or less. And that's the Big Bear area. A lot of people have heard of that. Big Bear Lake, Lake Arrowhead. And then the other mountain range just south of that, where I've spent a lot of time as well, is where Idlewild is, the the San Jacinto Mountains, the Riverside Mountain Range. Yeah, and where we have these mountains, like in most spots of the U.S., we have Sasquatch reports, among other things of strange, things of high strangeness. And a few years back, Claudia Ackley was out hiking down a trail. Now, this isn't a local, like, U.S. Forest Service where you park.
Ah, I think we're
But it's kind of a
oh,
trail
oh,
set.
I'm sorry, Matt. We lost you. You cut out for just a second there. Yeah, we lost you right at this. Isn't your usual U.S. forest trail?
Yeah, no, it's not like a trailhead that public goes hiking at. I mean, it is a public area, but it's kind of an offbeat. It's kind of an old road that's an old dirt road and with a lot of overgrown around it. So it's kind of like a locals area. It's not a big touristy. I've gone there in very busy summer days when the whole mountain area was packed and nobody's been on this road. So it's kind of a local area. A lot of locals go for a hike or walk their dog there. And it's kind of in the middle of a mountain community on the outskirts of Arrowhead. And so Claudia Ackley went there one day, I believe with her dogs and her daughter, and walked down this trail. Lo and behold, there was a odd-looking creature that what resembled somewhere between what we would think of as a Bigfoot and a human up in a tree, being very menacing. And she caught a very rough video of it on her phone. Her and her daughter saw it. It was very frightening to them. I know it was very traumatizing for Claudia and her daughter. And then from there, Claudia Ackley went on to start some GoFundMe pages and get some headlines because she had a couple of lawsuits going to sue certain government entities to have these species recognized as actually being real. She had one in Canada, I believe. She had one in California. And she hooked up with a controversial researcher named Todd Standing. She brought in some of his film evidence. He was on some documentaries a couple years ago on Netflix. And he's, some people love his work, some people don't like his work. Like I said, he's kind of a polarizing figure. So she brought in, she had a couple lawsuits. They didn't really go anywhere. Lawsuits are incredibly expensive, and especially when you're suing government agencies and stuff. And it was kind of back and forth. But that's kind of the long and short of it, is that she had a encounter in one of the Southern California mountains close to the Arrowhead Lake area. And yeah, she kind of just went on from there with it. And that area in general has had a history of Sasquatch encounters. And I've spoken to a number of people who live in the vicinity that she had her encounter, who have also described very similar things.
So to add on a little bit to what you were just saying, it was so Claudia was on this trail. She had her two daughters with her.
Two daughters.
One of which was I believe was 11 at the time, and the other was 13, I want to say.
Right.
So she was with her two daughters out there, and she had when she was, to summarize her encounter a little bit, she was walking. She was very nervous about bears. They had just moved out to this area. It was her first time taking her daughters out into the woods, into this on a specific trail that she had come across. She saw her daughters walking in front of her. She saw the youngest one skipping, having a good time, and just stopped suddenly and looked like from side to side, like something crossed in front of her. So Claudia thought, uh-oh, it's a bear. So she was just watching, and when the second daughter got side by side next to her sister, she stopped and did the same thing. And so Claudia said, oh, well, it's a bear. That's it. And so Claudia took off running in front of them. And when she ran in front of them, she said they had this horrified look on their face. And when she looked in front of her, 30 feet up on this tree was this, what she described as this gigantic Neanderthal looking hairy creature, Sasquatch, so when she decided, so the Todd Standing, before Claudia Ackley decided to sue, to do any kind of lawsuit stuff, she got the idea because she heard an episode of Sasquatch Chronicles where Todd Standing was a guest, and he was talking about his intentions to sue the Canadian government to recognize the species, which was something he was doing before, Claudia, and he was hitting the podcasts and the social media circuit hard, really pushing that at that point in time. So she heard
Right.
that, and she thought, well, that sounds like a really good idea, because at the end of the day, what she had told me was it was her two kids that were looking at her saying, what are we supposed to do now? Because when Claudia did report it, and when she did have a fish and game officer come to her house and to do an investigation, they put her on the runaround. They went as far as to say, well, it could have been, because they said it could have been a bear, and she said it wasn't a bear, and she showed in the video. Oh, the video that one of her daughters got, it was her older daughter who got the video, and it was a Snapchat. It was a Snap thing. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
so
it was really grainy.
that's why, is because I mean, these tweens, they have a hair trigger to capture whatever events in
Right.
life,
Yeah.
but it's not, their head is not in HD land. I got to get this high definition of this. It's like, I need to snap this, whatever this is. I
Right.
don't. It was probably a comfort blanket. I'm speculating at this point.
Right.
So anyways, so she got this quick little Snapchat video that they were able to save, and you could clearly see that there was a figure in the tree line, dark figure there. And when she was showing the fish and game officer this, the video and all that, the fish and game officer, I mean, it was the typical, well, it was a bear. It was a bear. And
Right.
said, well, it wasn't a bear. It was more on the video. It looks dark, but it was more of an orangutan red, like an orangey reddish kind of orangutan color. And the fish and game
Right.
officer actually went as far as to say, there was an orangutan that escaped from the Big Bear Zoo a while back, and there's a good chance that it could have been an orangutan, because they said that there was an orangutan that may have escaped from the zoo years ago. In which case, this is where I always say, if a fish and game officer told me that, my reaction would have been like, well, yeah, that's probably exactly what it was. Now, what the hell are we going to do about this orangutan in the woods? Like, this is
Right.
not a stopping point. You don't end this conversation with, it's cool, it was just an orangutan. No, 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 no. Like, it just just to kind of tell you and give you an example of the runaround she was starting to get. And
Right. Right.
meanwhile, she has her two kids there who are having nightmares. They can't go outside. They can't be in the dark. I mean, it was an incredibly traumatizing experience for them. You'll know why once I get into, the story I'm going to tell. This is all leading up to, I want to talk to Matt about my experience within this encounter and within that area. So the kids were very traumatized by this, and I'm sure it was incredibly scary to have an official, a government official, an authority official, kind of say, this is the end of the line, this is all we're going to help you out with, now have fun living in this area. So I think that Claudia was a little, and this again, these are my words, my observation, my speculation, in my opinion, strongly. This is my opinion. I think that Claudia was painted into a corner, and she was, there's a desperation of wanting to be heard, wanting to be acknowledged, wanting to be believed. And not only that, when you have your two daughters looking at you like, what do we do? What do we do? Like, we saw this. And Claudia's like, she hears this guy talking about, well, I have intentions to sue the Canadian government, and this is what I'm going to do. And then a light bulb goes off in Claudia's head, and she's like, well, there's something. If he's
Right.
doing it, then I can do that. So she reaches out to Todd Standing. she reached out to Todd Standing and says, I'd love to pick your brain a little bit about the process, about what you're doing. I know it's completely different. I know it's apples and oranges and all that stuff. So Todd Standing, he reached out to Claudia and he said, he was very, now I should say here, I am not a Todd Standing supporter. I'm not a Todd Standing unsupporter, nothing like that. I understand the controversy and I get it. I totally get it. So I'm not coming in defense of anything. I'm just adding more, I'm just giving you more details to the association and more depth to what I know. But Todd Standing, I do know that Todd Standing flew down almost right away, flew down to California on his dime. He got airline tickets. He flew down to California to meet with Claudia. He stayed there for quite a few days. He not only did he help her do all the paperwork, file all the paperwork for the government and all that kind of stuff, he actually, out of his own pocket, he paid for all of that to happen. He went over there, and not only did he just say, I'll let you know what I did, I'm going to come down there and I'm going to give you a jump start, because, it was a process that he was pushing at that time in general. So during a time with, in Claudia, it takes a very certain person, a very certain personality, a very certain type, a very certain spirit to say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try to sue the state of California, or I'm going to try to sue the government, or I'm going to try. It takes a certain person to really do that kind of deal. And sometimes you're going to get good attention from it, and sometimes you're not going to get the kind of attention that you want to get from it. And I think that her association with Todd Standing and just the approach of the lawsuit in general may have have people squint their faces a little bit within the community there. But her whole defense in that was, when her back was against the wall and she was desperate and she needed help, nobody within the community and nobody within even her personal social inner circle friend, nobody stepped up in the way that he did to come up, not only just put his time forth, but put his money and his resources. And she always appreciated that. And she's never been a defender of Todd Standing, so to speak. I think she's just always been appreciative of what he did, and for that, I just think she has his back because he had her back when nobody did. So just to add a little bit more layers to the association with specifically with Todd Standing, because I remember I've talked to her quite a bit about that. So I met Claudia and was introduced to this whole area and this whole encounter by way of hearing Claudia on a podcast. I've heard her on several podcasts. Every time she did a podcast, it was at least 2 hours long. The story is just, there's so much to it.
Right.
And I remember hearing these stories multiple times over and over, so much so that, and when you hear one podcast and her on another podcast, there's always different little pieces that are all cohesive, but, it paints a more detailed picture. So at a certain point, I got to know Claudia's encounter almost like a song. Like, I understood where the bullet points, I understood her emotional arc as much as I could just by listening. I reached out to Claudia and told her what I did. I said, I'd love to sit down with you and see if we can draw the creature that, you saw in the woods. And so she got back to me and said that she would love that. She was very enthusiastic. And then within a couple weeks, I went out to Lake Arrowhead and met with Claudia to do just that. So when I went to meet up with her and to check out the area and all that, I had the same amount of information as everybody else. The association with Todd Standing, the very fact that she was trying to sue, the government and all this. And if I hadn't taken the time to really listen to her encounter story told in its entirety, long form, you know, when you get just the bullet points, the whole thing sounds a little kooky, like a lot of encounters. A lot of these encounters, if you just summarize them, you're doing a great injustice to the whole deal.
Right.
So
Well, there's just so much going on, and I just wanted to kind of interrupt here for a second to throw out what my perspective is as somebody who's heard hundreds of cases and seen, and everybody's Bigfoot encounter has tendrils and offshoots and stories and follow-ups to it. So it really reads like, an old school FBI like file on a lot of these type of cases. For me personally, I think the lawsuits are a mistake and a waste of time and a big waste of money. I think I don't particularly care for Todd Standing. I think he was more interested in promoting his career or the discovery of Sasquatch. Honestly, the whole Todd Standing thing, the lawsuit, I think is a waste of time and money, and I really don't even care. The thing that gets to me, though, is this was a real person with kids who saw something that shouldn't exist. And when you put it up there with the other encounters that have happened in the area, when you put it up there with other people who have seen similar things, and when you put it really paints a much bigger picture. And I think at the end of the day, and for me, I'm really interested in the nuts and bolts of it and her description of what we saw, how she described it, the noises it made, where it was up in a tree, the time of day. That's the stuff that's really interested to me. Sue the government all you want, they're never going to acknowledge it. It's a waste of time and money. Todd Standing, he had money and he had the recognition, which was good to get traction, but he also was infamous at the same time, and not for good reasons. So if we throw all that aside and look at the actual evidence, her video, yes, it was grainy. I did not know it was Snapchat. It was just described to me as an older phone. For me, there's two major things. If I'm just out in the woods filming or on a phone filming, and later that day I go back and look at the footage and go, what was that? That could be a Sasquatch, I don't know. But you didn't see it at the time. That is completely different than, what is that over there? I see it moving, it's talking, it's swinging back and forth, and I'm physically looking at something. I'm acknowledging it's there. I have multiple people acknowledging it's there, and I'm filming it. That's two different things other than just after the fact trying to point out something in the woods. And so I think, yes, it's blurry video, but there's clearly something there moving. If you've been to that tree, which I know you have, I've been to it a bunch of times.
same here, yeah.
Even if I somehow wanted to get two guys and an extension ladder and haul it, a half mile down this road and go through the bushes and put an extension ladder in this tree, climb up the tree, put a guy in a red monkey suit, put him up in this tree to wait for some random lady to come by and scare her, it just doesn't make sense. So it really, really doesn't, especially if you've been there and you look at this tree and how high up there it is. And
I did a video depicting or breaking down the height of the tree and how big the creature in the woods would have been. I'm not sure if you've seen that yet. I'll have to send that your way. But yeah, you're right. It would have been, I mean, I'm like a little gazelle. I'm a little skinny guy. I could climb up trees. I'm a little parkour gazelle, when I'm at the playground with my son.
You couldn't have got up there.
No way. And I was tripping out about that when I went out there and I was looking up. First, it does not look that high in her video at all.
Well, it's on a hill. So, and the trail's up here, the tree's down here. So if you're looking at it from the trail, it's almost eye level. But when you walk down to the level of the tree, you're like, oh my God, it's way up there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's baffling. Like though, and the nuts and bolts of this whole stuff thing that you're talking about is what I want to get into. It was important to at least cover a little bit of the other stuff here, so that way
There's
people
so much to
watching,
this.
there's
Yeah.
so much to this, you know, and sometimes the cloud of Todd standing and the cloud of the lawsuit kind of makes people go, you know what? I don't want to touch this. I don't want to go anywhere near this. There's, you know, it's too murky. But it's important to just get that out of the way, to acknowledge that, to get to stuff that observations I have made, and experiences I've had, you know, there with her, working with Claudia, that I have wanted to share for a long time. And I actually reached out to Matt because I've seen on his YouTube channel that he's covered that whole area quite a bit. He's covered not just her encounter, but just the area, that trail as a whole. He has spent quite a bit of time out there. And I
Yeah.
have, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually very convenient for me where I am in Orange County. If I can go out during the week, I can be up there in an hour, hour and 15 minutes. So if I get a morning or an afternoon, I can just pop up there, pack of water in a granola bar, go hit that trail, go check a few other spots and be back very quickly. So it actually turned out to be kind of a convenient spot to go check this out. And as we get more rain and more snow and other ways of collecting footprints, maybe collecting hair samples or whatever, as different times of years, the leaves fall off, as the forest changes throughout the years and animals migrate, I think it's good to go back once a month, once every few weeks, keep checking on this area, because this area is very strange in that I've been up there times where I feel like I could have just fallen asleep on that trail. There was nothing going on. And there's other times I've been seriously creeped out.
Oh,
And where I feeling of being watched, strange sounds off in the distance, you know, your spidey senses going off kind of a thing, and just very, very odd place. And you know, it's either on or it's off there, and there's no telling what you're going to get when you go. So yeah, it's been very convenient for me because it's a place that I can just go up. Living in Orange County in Southern California, there's not a lot to do here as far as paranormal research. I mean, there is in like certain extents, but it's one of those areas that I can get to relatively easily and cover frequently. And I plan on going back quite a bit.
that's awesome. That's cool that you're able to do that. All the more, again, the reason why I reached out to you is because of your knowledge of that area, because there's a lot more activity that has been reported in that area. Well, I don't know if that reported, but that we've heard of in that area. Um, so when I met with Claudia, I met, you know, with the understanding that I was going to go to the trail. She's going to show me where everything happened, and then we were going to do an eyewitness sketch. I was going to work with her to draw this creature, which was, you know, an enormous alpha male. And Claudia had one daughter that was in town with her. The second daughter, the older daughter that was, you know, part of this whole encounter, she doesn't live there. She doesn't live there anymore with her. She moved out of the woods. She didn't want anything to do with that place after that whole thing happened. So the younger one was still there. And I remember having a conversation with Claudia, and Claudia telling me that her daughter just wants nothing to do with this. She does not like this talking about this subject. She does not like talking to people about this. She's very just like, whatever, just, you know, she's the kid at school that can't spend the night at people's houses because her mother is the Bigfoot woman. And she's the kid who can't throw the trash out at the end of the driveway in broad daylight without, you know, a grown-up standing at the door watching her to make sure she's not taken. But she just, there's nothing amusing about this to her. There's nothing fascinating about this to her. Her whole experience, she hasn't listened to podcasts or anything. And I think The only time she ever tried listening to her mother on a podcast or in an interview, she got bashed really hard. And because Claudia has been dragged through the mud in some interviews, and for, you know, I think her daughter saw that and was like, you know what, screw this, I'm not, you know, none of this stuff. So whenever researchers would go over to their house and whatnot, she would just, I think she tried talking to a couple people, and they weren't really able to get much out of her. I think, you said you met her, right? The younger daughter.
Yeah, yeah, I did, and she seemed nice and she was polite, but she kind of, typical teenage girl was, oh, hey, how you doing? Yeah, we saw something and blah blah blah, and kept it kind of short, and then went back to her room to play on her phone or whatever. So,
Yeah.
and that was about all. And I wasn't going to press her. I wasn't going to push her on it. If she wanted to talk, she wanted to talk. And a couple times that I met Claudia in person, Claudia was just, she had so much to share, I'm a talker, and she had a lot to try to get in. And then talking with Ed, and then looking at pictures, and then wanting to show me this spot near our house and that spot near our house. There was just so much going on that I really didn't have time to, sit down and try to get her to open up. Um, and honestly, her whole, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to listen to podcasts. I want to just pretend this never happened to go away. She's a smart one.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
um,
Yep.
um, yeah. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. Like I said, back to what we were saying with the nuts and bolts of their description, the time of day, the time of year, like just the facts, man. If you comb away all the noise, all the stuff, all the good and bad of this case, and you just look at the facts as reported that are corroborated by video, multiple eyewitness, and as a background of that area having, it's quite fascinating, and that's why I have been going back. So you were going to say that you actually got to talk to her and open up, which I'm very intrigued to hear. I'm always, because that's kind of the $1,000,000 question. If someone says, I saw Sasquatch, they say, well, how big was it? The first two questions was, how big was it? It was 9 feet tall. It was 8 feet tall. Okay, what did its face look like? That's what everybody wants to know. And
Yeah.
you're in a very good position that drawing Sasquatch, getting these eyewitness descriptions, and getting it out of her, contrasting it with Claudia, because that's what everybody wants to know. And from my classifications and videos that I've done, where we kind of have subspecies and different types and different varieties, the only thing that's consistent is the inconsistency. And I think you've probably experienced that too. I mean, other than them being somewhere between a human and somewhere between an ape, there seems to be a lot of difference in a lot of areas. Some areas have stuff that look very similar to each other, and other areas are completely different. So that's the part that would really intrigue me if you got to be able to talk to the daughter, because I find that kids don't, especially if she's not listening. She's a great example of normal people who don't listen to podcasts or watch the TV shows or have a preset notion of what this looks like in their brain. So
Right.
it's a very good opportunity to get, like, I saw a Sasquatch, now am I superimposing what I think Sasquatch should look like, or interpretations, or listening to other people's discussion and using their verbiage in my discussion. But at the same time, a layperson might not always know the difference between an ape, the difference between a chimpanzee, the difference between a monkey,
Right.
So when you use those terms interchangeably, it can paint a very different picture. Oh, it looked like a caveman. All right, you mean the Geico caveman, or do you mean a real caveman? Like I was telling you yesterday, I've never met a caveman. I don't know what they look like. So when you say caveman or monkey, it's like, okay, there's a million types of monkeys. There's a bunch of different types of apes. So you have to, especially when you talk about a 13 or 14-year-old girl, as bright as they may be, might not necessarily be as worldly or as experienced or have the vocabulary or know the zoological differences, even in their description, to just be throwing out terms like that.
Right. And With her, I mean, the experience there, going there and working with them was incredible. Working with the daughter was just so unexpected, and that was just that really solidified things for me, to be honest with you, with that whole thing. Because like I said, there's a lot of mud, there's a lot of murky waters, there's a lot of clouds, the Todd standing clouds, and then you have the clouds of social justice with the lawsuit, I mean.
Right.
And so, and yeah, man, and I was not blind to that, again, I just kind of saw through that a little bit because I spent a lot of time listening to this woman tell her story. And so when I went down there, as I do, I before COVID happened, I would, meet with people and actually travel down and all that good stuff. And I would, talk to people on the phone. We'll spend some time, we'll visit and all that. And then, I will only really go on with what I do is if I really feel I feel some sort of connection, or if I believe this person. That sounds horrible. I've never talked to somebody and gotten to a point where like, I don't believe that. It has not happened yet. But I always have to be open to that. I have to be open to, the fact that there could be people just I don't know. There are people out there that just are, who knows why they do what they do. Anyway, so the mentality I have behind it is, if I travel somewhere and I'm with this person and it turns out my BS meter goes off and I'm thinking, I don't know about this. I think that this whole thing's full of hullabaloo, whatever. I will think to myself, this is what I tell myself. This is how I prepare myself. I always think to myself, the end of the day, it's not like I'm a Chilean miner digging holes somewhere. I'm in the middle of the woods with people who will get as nerdy about Bigfoot as I will. And they'll talk at length about Bigfoot with me. And they're going to show me all these off trails. A lot of time they're so hospitable. They'll cook you food. We go out to dinner. We have a good, and you get to hang with people that are into stuff that you're into. So no matter what, there's a way to make a good time out of it. No matter what, you're out in nature, and so like, no matter what, it's a win. It'd be even better if they were telling the truth and if they actually had an encounter and we could actually do something, and fortunately it has always been that. I have never had someone set off the BS meter in my head where I'm like, this was a waste of time. Hasn't happened yet, but I still prepare myself for that. So going to Lake Arrowhead was no different, especially when you have the clouds. So Claudia picks me up. She's super cool, super personable. Just as you said, she talks, a mile a minute, just like me. So we're two of us are talking. We're in her van. And she said, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to pick up my daughter, my youngest daughter, from school. Her ride fell through. And so you may just have to wait in the car for a minute while I, run inside, sign her out and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, it's fine. I remember an earlier conversation that me and her had where she had said to me that, the whole deal, she doesn't like talking to people. She's not cool with this kind of stuff. So I had said to Claudia, listen, I don't want you to think that just because I flew out here, she didn't pay for anything. I don't charge witnesses for this kind of stuff. So she didn't pay for me to go out there or anything like that. The reason why I'm saying this is because I was worried that she was going to feel obligated to have to just over Bigfoot me with information all the time. And if she had her daughter in the car with us and her daughter doesn't like this kind of stuff, I didn't want Claudia to feel pressure to have to talk to me about that, even if her daughter's right there. So I made sure to tell Claudia, like, hey, even though I flew down here, even though whatever, blah, 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 I just want you to know it's cool. We don't have to talk about Bigfoot while your daughter's in the car and, or whenever she's around for that matter. Let's not do that. One thing that I should mention is that I have a background working. I have a background as a social worker. I did social work for years and years in Tucson. From street outreach to I worked in a couple of transitional living programs for teenagers and even younger. So I've worked with a lot of kids, specifically kids dealing with trauma. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not any of that stuff. I'm just a guy that likes to draw, has a lot of fancy hats, and has done a lot of social work and worked with a lot of damaged kids. So with that being said, we know I was very weary about, tried to be very respectful of the fact that this young kid may be not wanting to have anything to do with this. So Claudia said, when I told her that, she said, yeah, that's usually what I would tell people. But when I told her you were coming, I work before, I haven't since the COVID thing, but I'm a tattoo artist. And she said, when I told her you're a tattoo artist and that, you do film, like you're an amateur filmmaker and all that stuff, she was very intrigued by that. So she started looking up my YouTube stuff and all this. And she's like, why is this tattooer? This is a junior high kid. So a mother just told her junior high kid that a tattoo artist is coming to hang out and talk about Bigfoot stuff. And he draws pictures and he's going to, he edits and all that stuff. So I'm sure the kid's cool meter is like, this is awesome. A tattoo artist going, why is he? And she even said, like, why is he coming to see my mom? Why is he coming to see my mom? What's going on there? Who is this? So Claudia said that she was just intrigued to know what my interest was in this whole deal. So she said, so go ahead. If it gets to a place where I think she's getting uncomfortable, I'll let you know. I said, cool. So pick her up. She's in the car. Exactly how you mentioned the whole time. Her security blanket is her little phone, and she's like beep 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 beep. She kind of talks to you like this, beep 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 beep. And in the car, I'm talking to Claudia, and I think she could just hear me the way I was talking to Claudia and the way we were talking about it. I just think she was, again, this is me, just my speculation here, but it seemed like a lot of witnesses have done with me. They're just kind of feeling me out to see, who are you? Are you worthy of any kind of my trust? Because it really does take a lot of trust for witnesses to sit down and just even tell you their story, let alone sit down with you and really dive into things analytically in the way that, I'm trying to do, so I get it. There's a screening process that's involved. And even I saw it with this kid. So I don't know if it was that, I think that next day, the very next day, we were planning to go to the location, and then we were going to plan on doing the eyewitness sketch with Claudia. So that night I got there, she cooked dinner, Ed was there, Ed Brown, and their daughter, her daughter, not Ed, but Claudia's youngest daughter, was also there. She was upstairs in her room. And I'm sitting in the living room with Ed, and we're just watching TV, just chit-chatting and whatnot. And Claudia was upstairs, and Claudia comes downstairs almost frantic. And she like just goes, she said she wants to talk to you. She said she wants to talk to you. I was like, what? She said she'll talk to you. She said she'll talk to you. I was like, who? And she said, her daughter, her youngest daughter, she said she'll talk to you. She said she wants to talk to you. I was like, oh, sure, okay. And so I thought tomorrow when I talk to Claudia that her daughter's going to join us, and and we're going to talk about what happened and all that stuff. I was like, that's awesome, But right there, as soon as I said, oh, cool, Claudia looks upstairs and she says, come on downstairs, baby. It's okay. Come on downstairs. Come on downstairs. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay. And I look over to Ed, and Ed's like doing this, like, whoa, like, really? Is she? Oh. So right away I was like, oh, okay. So she must not talk about this a lot. And so here she comes downstairs, beep, 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 and I said, hey, how's it going? And she's like, fine, so fine. And so she sits down in the living room, and we're just sitting there. And Claudia, she's kind of walking around, you could tell she's just very like anxiously waiting for this. And, Ed's sitting up straight. And she said, I don't remember a lot of details the way my mom does. Like, my mom remembers this a lot, like remembers this like in detail, because she talks about it a lot, you know. And she goes, I don't really remember much. And I said, you know, it's fine, you know, like I didn't come all the way out here because I don't believe you guys. So first and foremost, you know, I believe you guys. And so if you want to talk, you know, I would love to hear what you heard. I'd love to, you know, whatever you want to tell me, even if it's a little bit, you know, I'd love to hear what happened. And so she's like, well, okay, you know. And man, she 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 knew 10 times more details. She remembered 10 times more than Claudia remembered.
Hmm.
So Claudia, I remember telling you that I knew Claudia, I was familiar with Claudia's story almost as if it were a song. The bullet points, how it began, the this, the that, and then the daughter stops and go, and I thought, uh-oh, and I run in front. I mean, I know it like a song, the emotional arc, so much so that when I was there and I was going down the trail, I'm looking around the trail, and in my head, I'm going through that arc in my head. Now, keep in mind, this is not just from listening to the encounter. This specific encounter has been covered brilliantly to death by a lot of people, including myself. I have a little breakdown on the YouTube channel. You have stuff that you've done where you've gone out there and covered this.
I
Bigfoot.
did a whole interview with her, and yeah, I did a whole video follow up. Yeah, I did a whole big thing on her.
And Bigfoot Tony does an incredible breakdown of that whole area as well too, and gives you a very detailed like sense of the landscape and area. They do pictures, you know, different before and afters and all this different stuff. So between all of the video breakdowns from all the, you know, all the YouTubers that we all, you know, watch and listen to, between that and listening to her story, it painted a pretty vivid picture for me. So it was really exciting for me to go out there because I was going to be able to really see it firsthand and fill in those blanks, you know, in person versus just using my imagination as far as the location, not the encounter, you know. So I get there and I'm on the trail and I'm looking around. I'm like, man, you know, when we were coming around the corner, you know, when you come around that little corner and you kind of see that little hook where, you know, there's a tree right there. I mean, I saw it. I was able to recognize everything from everything. I was surprised by how familiar I was with everything. And the whole while, I'm like, so when you were right here, what were you thinking? When we were right here, what were you thinking? And she's going over everything and all that stuff. And it was incredible. I was like, yeah, this is the song. I'm inside of this song right now. This is bizarre, you know. So I'm talking with the daughter, talking with the youngest daughter, and she starts telling me the encounter from her side. So I'm thinking this should be interesting because I know this song. This song's my jam, you know. This is my jam. I know it. So let's see how, you know, how they coincide. Let's see if she's singing the same song. Man, it was the same song, only it was in a minor key with completely different instruments. It was her own unique point of view, her own emotional arcs. When her mom, during points when her mom was thinking certain things, her mind was somewhere completely different. And reason being is because when we talked about the encounter earlier, when Claudia saw her daughters walking in front of her and come to a stop and look like something was crossing in front of them, it's because Claudia saw that giant alpha male. Presumably that's what she's, you know, according to her description, it was a giant alpha male. I didn't see it was a male myself. She's pretty confident it was. Her daughter saw this one up on the tree as well too, but before the daughter saw this one, two more ran right in front of them and crossed paths, almost about 12 feet in front of them. And they crossed paths right in front of them, ran down the hill behind the tree. And when they looked up the tree that they ran behind, they saw the big one. And that's when Claudia came running up behind them. And they turned and looked at their mom, and the mom saw their look in their face and ran in front of them, looked up the tree and saw the big one. It wasn't until they were driving home where they were frantic. I mean, they were frantic. The mom stopped them and said, hey, calm down. Tell me what you saw. And she said, well, the first one. And Clyde's like, wait, what? The first one? She said, yeah, there was three of them. I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, two crossed right in front of me. And there was one that looked younger, and there was one a little taller in front of it that she think that, she said it seemed kind of like feminine looking, like very, she said it could have been like a mother and a kid. They don't know for sure or anything like that, but they were smaller than the one in the tree for sure. So they walked right in front of her, made really strong eye contact with her, and and so she was traumatized by that whole deal. So she's talking to me about her encounter, about she's walking, and about how just out from her left they cross right in front of her here. She sees them and they go down the hill, and she said the whole time that they were doing that, she said they made eye contact with her. The smaller one behind, there was two creatures, one in front that was taller, one smaller behind. The one behind was looking down at this one's feet. So this one here was making strong eye contact with the daughter. So the whole time, she said, it would never break eye contact. So it was going away, looking at her the whole time like this, going off down the hill the whole time, not taking her eyes off of the kid. While the smaller creature just kept its eyes on the feet of the bigger one. So I remember one thing that really stood out to me when she was talking about this thing was the thing that's really just burnt into her psyche is the way that this thing looked at her when it made eye contact. She said that it was all black, big eyes, and they were all black in the eyes. The way she's described them, said it was almost like the contacts the raver kids wear, like it was all black.
Right.
She said so much so that she said she wasn't sure that if it was looking directly at her or if it was looking over her shoulder and around her, because there was no whites and she couldn't get a sense of direction. But she could see them moving around, but she couldn't get a sense of where they were looking because there was no whites in the eye. So she was tripping out about that. One thing that was really interesting is whenever she would say, this is one of the reasons why I really like doing witness sketches in person or Zooms. It's just over the phone, I can make it work, but in person, it's incredible for this reason. So every time she would say, it looked at me, she would always do this. She was always very mousy when she taught, very just, just kind of like, and I mean, we talked for about 4 hours. I mean, we sat there for a long time. We sat and talked we talked about this thing for about 2.5 hours. And then for the rest of the whole time spent was about 4 hours. And the rest of that time we did a witness sketch with her. So whenever I noticed that her posture was always kind of, when she's talking to me, was one way, but then when she would say, when it looked at me, she would always go like this. She would talk and she'd go, and it was crossing. Then like when it looked at me, and it would blah, blah, blah. And every time she would get into this pose and just go forward and go, and then it looked at me, and it looked at me. And without even thinking about it, she was starting to replicate the posture of what this creature was doing. And then when she was further explaining, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, I find that fascinating. See, I didn't get a lot of this from Claudia. I just kind of got a general overview from it. And to be honest, it's been a couple of years since I've looked at this case, and I've heard so much other stuff that you're saying stuff that's kind of jogging my memory on the case again. But it's really, a lot of people report that with Bigfoot, especially when they catch them looking in like the windows of houses, or they catch them on a trail. A lot of people report this, unfortunately, this very creepy, like leering that a lot of these creatures get around kids. They just like, they'll be doing their thing or moving, and they're just like this leering, like oh my God, it's a human. Oh my God, it's a baby human. Kind of like maybe we do when we see a baby bear at the zoo or something. We're
Right.
like, this kind of like locked eyed, leering, no matter what they do or how they move, they're always looking at the exact same point, looking at you, and almost in a very kind of sinister way. And it's interesting how she said that because I've heard that so many times before. Hunters in a tree stand, people with a cabin in the woods, and they catch this thing staring at them through a window. Even running across a road, the entire time this thing's booking across the road, this thing's got its eyes locked right at the car.
Locked. Right. I've heard that too.
Locked. And when it comes to, locked and leering, but when it comes to like kids, it's almost kind of like, hate to say it, almost kind of like a pervert look or something like that. It's like, like this really creepy, sinister, where they're looking and you can tell the gears are turning in that Sasquatch's brain. And it's very interesting how she brought that up because that's actually quite common, people that have a close encounter with one of these things, or not a fleeting where you saw them but they didn't see you, where there's an actual interaction, a back and forth. That they report that a lot, where it's just like, and honestly, from the Sasquatch's perspective, these people were probably staring at them point blank with their mouth open.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
when they,
they're probably given a lot of the same, like you walk into somebody on the bathroom on accident, it's just shock on both sides,
yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think there's a certain factor of that as well.
Like this wasn't supposed to happen, you know? Well, they were gonna say even where the big one was
Right. It's
positioned,
like,
and
now what?
right, you've been to that trail, right where they
Oh, yeah.
are, and right where they say that the alpha male was positioned on that tree. If they were coming, I mean, it would have been a perfect lookout, you know? I mean, you had a perfect view from both ends of the trail coming down. So, I don't
Okay.
know.
I'll tell you, last time I was there, when I set up the trail camera, it was a busy day. There was a bunch of people out walking their dogs. I was standing right by that tree, and two people and their two dogs came down the trail, and I just kind of stood still and watched them. I didn't get one head turn, not the dogs, not the people, nothing. Nobody acknowledged or saw me there because they were looking at the trail and they were going right ahead.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow, you really could just kind of stand here and watch everybody go by. And, unless you're actively looking around, like me, when I'm out there, I'm looking up, looking down, looking at everything because I'm looking for something odd. If you're just out there walking your dog on a hike, and I think I was wearing neutral colors. I was wearing like a dark green shirt or something, and I just kind of stood there, not particularly hiding. And they walked by, and then a while later, somebody else walked by the other way, and none of them acknowledged, even looked, even did anything. Like nobody saw me,
Oh
So I can
no,
imagine
yeah.
if I was more up in a tree and more, hiding behind a tree, like, it'd be a great ambush spot. In fact, when I put a camera there, I was really worried about somebody taking the camera, stealing it, you know, not so much messing with it, like hoaxing it, but just, oh, camera, yoink, you
Take it,
know,
yeah.
and I left it there for 2.5 weeks. And from what I saw from the pictures, nobody came close to it. Nobody molested it. Nobody messed with it or anything. And it was 40, 50 feet from the trail. And if you squinted hard from the trail, you could see it. But it just, especially today with everybody's phones and everything else, I think people are just that less observant than maybe even we were 20 or 30 years ago. But yeah, it was kind of interesting how they brought that up, that it's a great hiding spot on the trail, because I stood there and filmed and was doing different things, and people were walking by and paid me no never mind. It was really interesting.
So I remember her saying that well, like when I say that her song was a completely different song in a minor key with other instruments. What I mean by that
Right.
is, when her emotional arc throughout that whole thing it was completely different. When she saw that, it was she didn't know what to think. She was stunned, and she's trying to process what was going on, and it was just they're walking away. Then she saw the big one up on the tree, and that was when her mom came running up behind her and ran in front of her. And she said, my mom looked at this thing and was like in a trance, like she was like And she said, my mom started walking towards it. And I was like, what is she doing?
I
And
remember hearing that, thinking that's odd.
yeah,
Like she was being hypnotized by it.
she's like, she just kept walking up to it. And I was like, mom, mom, mom. And, and she said that she remembers thinking, because Claudia is looking up at the tree at this ginormous creature staring down at her. But the daughter isn't really thinking about that. The daughter's looking down at the ground because she keeps thinking, my mom doesn't know that there's more. So she thought that a whole like tribe of them were going to come running up from the woods. She thought a lot of them were going to come running up after them. So the daughter wasn't really concerned about the one up on the tree. She was freaked out because she knew there was some on the ground right there, and possibly more on the side over here where they just ran out of. So from her daughter's point of view, it's not just this thing on the tree, it's these things that are, you know, down this hill, throughout this hill. So the daughter starts backing up, and she started backing up almost into a bush. And so she starts saying, I want to go home now. I want to go home now. Because all she kept thinking is, we're going to be ambushed. So she was not worried about this. And there was one in the tree was looking at them. And Claudia got its attention, and it looked at Claudia. And then it started like rocking back and forth and whatnot. And that's when Claudia, they started backing away and whatnot. And
you know, it almost makes me wonder that it was an ambush if they just would have kept walking down the trail, or potential, or that's the way that the dad was up in the tree and the other two were somewhere higher up on the trail waiting for her. Because some of the creepy experiences I've had on that road, I got the feeling of like Jurassic Park with the raptor coming from either side. That's the feeling I got on that road. And it almost makes me wonder that because Claudia saw this thing in the tree, kind of made them, so to speak, and was transfixed and was over off to the side and not on the road, which was the ambush spot. Maybe it wasn't meant for them. Maybe they were waiting for a deer to go by. Maybe they were waiting for a stray dog to kill. Maybe they were just hanging out. I don't know. Yeah. But it sounds like they maybe could have been in a position to where the leader, the big one, is up top, and the other two could come out and maybe drive it away. And who knows how far these things can jump and hop. But I got a feeling if that big guy in the tree wanted down from that tree and be in your face, he could do it in about a second. So yeah, maybe it was some kind of ambush or observation, or maybe they wouldn't want humans. Maybe they wanted deer. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or I think for the most part, Sasquatch. Yeah. I think for the most part, for hunting for Sasquatch, I think occasionally in certain areas, in certain parts, they will take human beings. I think they, you know, every single carnivorous animal out there will eat a human if they have a chance. Your house cats will eat you if you die in your house. You know, like everything will, you know, carnivores, survival of the fittest. It's a brutal place out there. But I also think that these are very intelligent creatures where they know if I take a human, more humans are going to show up. They're going to have dogs. They're going to have guns. And that humans are, yeah, I could eat one, but oh my God, the amount of trouble it's going to cause if I take one. Versus waiting for a deer or a stray dog or a coyote or a natural food source or a more natural food source. Versus if you're way back in the middle of the Sierras, 15 miles from anybody else, and you're by yourself, they might be able to get away with it then, you know, and it might even be up to the individual. So yeah, it almost sounds like a hunting behavior, that it was an ambush spot, maybe not meant for Claudia and her kids, but she uncovered the trap, or the trap, they were in the wrong spot, or she caught them in the middle of something, kind of a feeling is like what I get from it.
Right, which is all speculation put out there, by the way. All that speculation.
Well, obviously we don't know. It's just that's what it sounds like when you have one up in a tree and two coming back across the trail you were just on. It sounds like if Claudia hadn't stopped, she would have walked right into where the other ones were, or been very, very close to them.
Yeah, it's something very strategic, right?
Exactly. It's very strategic, and we can just even leave it at odd that that was the location of these creatures in where the trail is.
oh, another fascinating thing. There's a couple of things here. Um, when you listen, and people will understand this. When you listen to witnesses, or if you are a witness who talks about their story, really in depth about their story, there's always that point where they kind of pause, and then there's the apology, the moment of apology. Sorry, I've lost my track of thought here for a second, because suddenly they're there, you know,
Right.
they're swimming
Taking them
around,
back.
they're thinking back, and it's and the emotions and all that stuff they start to feel all that. It was way more heartbreaking than it was fascinating, seeing that with this 11-year-old. I think she was 11 or 12 at the time when I had met her. But when I had met her, this had happened just, I think, a year earlier, less than a year, a
Right.
year or two less than a year earlier. So it's fairly recent-ish. Um, but she's talking about this story, and this kid who does not listen to these things, who's not into this kind of stuff, and even at the beginning was hesitant, who was talking from behind her phone, that was clearly a comfort blanket. But as the more she got into it, because what I find is, with witnesses, a lot of times they're very nervous, even just to sit down and do an eyewitness sketch, because diving into these details, those little details of all the creature, I mean, they're triggers for them. And for anxiety attacks, for whatever, it just, it's a feeling that they don't want to revisit. They want to avoid that the trauma. But once we really start going, the process is incredible. I know I said it before, but the process is incredibly analytical, very analytical. And when the witnesses approach this whole deal that analytically, they're almost being able to approach it a little bit removed. You know what I mean? Emotionally removed from it, and they could kind of dissect it a little bit better. And when that happens, there's almost like they hit their stride. There's like a point in the session where it's always like this point where they just like, yeah, and then this, and then they start really going, because now their memories are going, they haven't thought about it for a long time, and now that they're really revisiting, they're remembering all this other stuff. She was doing just that, and dead in the middle of her spewing out all this information, and she was like using her whole body to talk. She wasn't like this anymore. She's using her whole body to talk, and she's showing you how they're walking and all this. She's like, and then it looked at me, and then when it looked at me, and then she just kind of stopped for a second. She just goes, oh, and she was just stunned for a moment, and she goes, I'm sorry, I forgot, I'm sorry. I was like, it's all right. It's all right. I go, this happens a lot. I go, you'd be surprised. Like, you're doing really well. But it was heartbreaking. It was really heartbreaking, because you hear it in almost every, Sasquatch podcast you listen to. When people get into those encounters, there's those moments where like, sorry, it's just whenever I tell this story and you see this kid go through that, it's like, oh. So another observation I thought was pretty interesting was, she had mentioned, she was talking about the mouth, how wide the mouth was. It was very wide. Now, if you've listened to any, Sasquatch Chronicle episodes, when they start talking about the mouth was so wide, and when it opened, it was wide. And the go-to reference that Wes Germer for a while would always go to would be, is it kind of like Pac-Man? You mean kind of like Pac-Man?
It's
And
just
they go,
like
they go, yeah, like Pac-Man. Yeah, just like Pac-Man. He goes, yeah, and so much so where I would listen, and when they start talking about how wide the mouth is when it opened or whatever, they go, it was kind of like, in my head, I'm like, tell him, Wes, do it. And he'd be like, is it like Pac-Man? I'm like, yeah. It's like, yeah, it's like Pac-Man. So that's one of those things where, you just becomes this standard description that you hear, almost like this mouth, open it, in Sasquatch, you hear that a lot. It's like Pac-Man, or big almond-shaped eyes. You hear that a lot. Almond-shaped eyes or hooded nose. These terms that you hear quite a bit. So she's talking about the mouth. She said it was very wide. It was like very. It was almost like it in my head. I'm like, say it, say it. You know, give me Pac-Man, give me Pac-Man. You know, like a Wheel of Fortune. And she goes, it was almost like a frog. And I was like, what? She goes, not like exactly like a frog, but you know how a frog's mouth is kind of like a round? I go, yeah. She goes, kind of like that, almost kind of like a frog. So yeah, it was a very interesting, her description. There was a lot of those little things of her describing things I've heard before, but in a very different way. So the daughter had said that the hair was going straight up like a treasure troll. She said that it went up to a point that she could tell the head wasn't pointy. She could tell the head wasn't pointy. It had a rounded head. She said that the hair was up.